All right, here we are back at it with Aristotle. We are on, at this point, book or chapter 2. Spent a whole video on chapter 1. You might think, is there going to be a whole video for every chapter he assigned? Nope, there's not going to be. We're going to start moving a little quicker, and I'm going to stop. I'm not going to have as close or give you as close attention to each line of the text the way I did with the first chapter. I will from time to time take a close look at the text, but not going to be trying to suss out exactly what Aristotle means. So, for example, we have in the first paragraph of chapter 2 quite a lot going on, but I'm going to push it till the discussion of chapter 4. What Aristotle's basically saying here is that scientific knowledge, and remember that's episteme, that's the thing Plato was interested in and that Socrates was interested in. Episteme, or scientific knowledge, or maybe another translation of it would be understanding, requires you to know the explanation of something. So if you want to say you have scientific knowledge of X, you have to be able to explain X. So let's say, I'm going to use the term understanding here. Understanding of X requires an explanation of X. And he says, an explanation of X shows that, here to go back, shows that something cannot be other than it is. Shows that X cannot be other than it is. Now, you put these two claims together, and it says that if you understand X, then you know that X can't be other than it is. Or in other words, to understand something, it has to be a necessary truth. I'm going to have a lot more to say about that. There's a lot more to say about these two claims. But I'm going to leave that till chapter 4, where Aristotle discusses it a little further. What I'm going to focus on in chapter 2 is what Aristotle has to say about demonstration. Because demonstration, which is going to play a big role in understanding, is going to, or the nature of demonstration is going to lead Aristotle into a puzzle. It's sometimes called the regress argument. And that is going to be one of the more fruitful arguments in the history of philosophy. So it's a pretty big deal. All right, so demonstrations. Demonstrations are deductions. Oops. Now, in your translation, it says that demonstrations are syllogisms. That's not a great translation. A syllogism has to be two premises, or has to have two premises. And demonstrations are going to be actually like a bunch of syllogisms strung together, Aristotle thinks. It's not just going to be a two-premise argument. So where they have syllogism, just take them to mean deduction. Now, remember that Aristotle thinks every deductive argument can be broken down into syllogisms. So it's not like totally misleading, but just you want to avoid the idea that Aristotle thinks every demonstration is just two premises and a conclusion, and that's it. It's going to be a sequence of syllogisms. So you have one syllogism proving a conclusion, which becomes a premise in another syllogism, which proves something which becomes a premise in another syllogism, and so on and so forth. There's going to be a lot of steps here. Okay. So, demonstrations are deductions, but not all deductions are demonstrations. Demonstrations are a special kind of deduction. Demonstrations are necessary to have, or I shouldn't say that. Demonstrations are sufficient, rather, to have understanding, to have scientific knowledge. If you can demonstrate that something is true, then you have scientific knowledge that it's true. You understand that it's true. So if you wanted to, for example, show that you had scientific knowledge that human beings descended from some other mammal, Aristotle thinks you would need a demonstration of that. or rather, Aristotle would say if you had a demonstration of it, then that would prove it, right? And a good way to think of demonstrations is that they're basically proofs. Not proofs in the loose sense that like you have proofs in geometry or you have proofs in logic, which can sometimes prove things that aren't true. But proofs in the more colloquial sense, where if you prove something, it's true. Aristotle thinks if you can demonstrate something, it's true and you know it. All right. And that means it can't just be a deduction. For one thing, deductions can have false premises, but demonstrations must have true premises. And that makes perfect sense. If you're actually proving that something's true, right, then the premises have to be true. You can't prove that something's true on the basis of premises that are false. So this restriction makes perfect sense. But there's going to be other restrictions too, and some of them won't make as good a sense as the restriction to true premises. But by itself, this shows you that demonstrations are a kind of deduction, but not all deductions are demonstrations, because you can do deductive logic with false premises. Because right? Remember, deductive logic is about validity. So an argument can be deductively valid, even if it has false premises, as long as it's true that if the premises were true, the conclusion would be true. Okay. So these premises are supposed to be true. They're also supposed to be, and here I will go back to the text a little bit. Okay, so we have here the premises must be true. We also have that they must be primary and indemonstrable. So let's go back here. Primary and indemonstrable. And basically, these two conditions, I'm just going to say amount to the same thing. There are some minor differences for Aristotle. There's also some translation issues going on here. This should really be primary and immediate, not indemonstrable. But what these both amount to say that a proposition is primary or to say that it's indemonstrable, what he's really getting at is can be known without demonstration. So remember a little bit ago when I tripped up and I said demonstrations are necessary for knowledge, and then I said, wait, no, they're sufficient for knowledge. They're sufficient for scientific knowledge. Aristotle does not think the only way to come to have scientific knowledge of something is a demonstration. That's what chapter 3 is going to show has to be true. What he's saying here is that demonstrations must have premises that are known but not by demonstration. When he says indemonstrable, he probably means indemonstrable. Indemonstrable means can't be demonstrated. You probably don't want to say can't be demonstrated, though, because you can demonstrate just about anything, presumably. Although we'll see with the next 3 conditions, it might be difficult to demonstrate certain things. But the real point here is that you don't need to demonstrate them. Some things, Aristotle thinks, can only be known via a demonstration, but some things don't need to be. And the premises of a demonstration have to be primary and indemonstrable, meaning you can know them and you do know them without demonstration. Now, this is where I want to bring up again my dislike of the fact that they translated deduction as syllogism. The Greek word is like syllogismos, so it makes sense, but that can confuse people because nowadays syllogism means a 2-premise argument. And here's what Aristotle's not saying. He's not saying that everything that can be demonstrated from 2 primary and indemonstrable premises, right? Because that would mean that the only stuff that can be demonstrated follows immediately from stuff that can be known without demonstration. He doesn't think that. It's very clear in other works he doesn't think that. So what do I mean? Well, let's have some very uninformative arguments here. Let's say all A's are B's, right? And then we say all B's are C's. From that, you can conclude that all A's are C's. Okay. Let's just suppose that both of these are indemonstrable, primary and indemonstrable. Here is what Aristotle's not saying. He's not saying that all that can be demonstrated is this first conclusion, right? Imagine we now take this conclusion, all A's are C's, and we put it into another argument. So we say all A's are C's, and we say some C's are D's. And then we conclude that some A's are C's. Actually, no, wait. I need to do this differently. That's not a valid argument. Sorry about that, everybody. So say some A's are D's, and then that allows us to conclude that some C's are D's. There we go. Don't know why I made that mistake. So now we have primary and indemonstrable premises. This is not indemonstrable, right? This is not indemonstrable because it's just been demonstrated. It's been demonstrated because it follows from these primary and indemonstrable claims. And let's suppose that this is also, so we'll say it's demonstrable. Let's say these are both demonstrable. That doesn't mean that you haven't demonstrated that some C's are D's. Aristotle thinks you've demonstrated that some C's are D's. That's why it's a little confusing to say demonstrations are all syllogisms, because this is not a two-premise argument. This is a three-premise argument to get you all the way to some C's or D's. The three premises are this one, and this one. Right? Now, there actually will have to be more premises there, because if this is demonstrable, then that means there's something that demonstrates it. So you would need other premises that prove this, premises I haven't provided here. But just realize that demonstrations can be longer than two syllogisms. But in the end, they have to go back to primary and demonstrable claims. At the beginning of the demonstration, there have to be primary and indemonstrable claims. That's what this condition says. Okay, there's three more conditions. One is that, the premises have to be prior to the conclusion. They have to be better known than the conclusion. And they have to be explanatory of the conclusion. I'm using the word explanatory here. There's a Greek word, aitia, I guess that's what it's called. I don't know how to pronounce Greek. It's very often translated as cause. And so as a result, there's a lot of really weird claims in Aristotle. Like Aristotle says there's 4 different kinds of causes. And on some of those kinds of causes, a later thing can cause an earlier thing. So something that's going to happen 5 days from now can cause something to happen now. And you might be like, weird, Aristotle thinks that. No, all Aristotle's saying is that something that's happening 5 days from now can explain something that's happening now. For example, if I have a dentist appointment 5 days from now, I might be inclined to like brush my teeth extra so I don't get embarrassed today. And so it's better to translate aitia as cause. And I have provided you a translation that doesn't always do that. Or rather, it's better to translate aitia as explanation rather than cause. The translation I'm giving you doesn't always do that. That's unfortunate, but again, it's free. So we know from earlier in the chapter that explanations have to, or scientific knowledge requires explanation. So if demonstrations are sufficient for scientific knowledge, then explanation is going to have to play a role somewhere. And so he says the premises have to explain the conclusion. This is not much different than Plato's requirement expressed in the Euthyphro and again in the Meno, that you have to be able to explain why something's true if you have scientific understanding of it. So here, Aristotle's not saying anything particularly novel, even at his time. Prior to, I'm going to say, well, for one thing, for a premise to be prior to the conclusion, it has to be sort of closer to being primary and indemonstrable. It has to be, so for example, I shouldn't have erased that argument from before. That argument before, all A's are B's, right? And all B's are C's, proving that all A's are C's. And then we got that next argument, all A's are C's, some A's are D's, so some C's are D's. Well, let's extend it a little farther, right? Let's say we can derive from some C's are D's and all D's are E's. We get that some C's are E's. So we have now, let's zoom out a little bit. I'm going to put a blue check mark next to all the indemonstrable claims, right? And let's say that's it. And we have purple check marks next to all the demonstrated claims. Or actually, let's pretend that this one's indemonstrable. That should be blue, not red. There we go. The idea is you can't ever get something, or the idea with prior to is that the premises are always going to be closer to an indemonstrable claim than the conclusion, right? And by closer, I mean there's fewer steps from the indemonstrable claim to the premise than the indemonstrable claim to the conclusion. That's all that prior to means. So you can kind of imagine this as kind of like a hierarchy of claims. You have like a bunch of claims, a bunch of indemonstrable claims at the top. Right, we have a top level of indemonstrable claims, and then we have layers below it. And the idea is just when you're doing a demonstration, you're always going down, right? You're never going back up. You're never demonstrating something up here, right, closer to the set of indemonstrable claims with something that's down here, farther away from them, right? That's what prior to means. Prior to is also going to imply that the premises are relevant to the conclusion, but I'm not going to get into that there because, well, of course they're going to be relevant, right? That leaves better known than the conclusion. And this one, on the surface, looks totally straightforward. It looks like as straightforward as the requirement that the premises be true, right? That one made perfect sense. If you're proving something, your premises need to be true. If you're going to prove that something's true, you need to have good evidence. And good evidence is accurate evidence, right? And similarly, better known than the conclusion suggests that the very common sense notion that if I'm going to prove something to you, my evidence better be something you already know to be true, right? Like if I try to prove to you, let's say you're someone who doesn't believe in evolution. And because you don't believe in it, you don't know it. Right? You have to believe in something to know it. According to Plato, Aristotle accepts that too. And let's suppose I'm trying to prove to you that human beings originated in Africa. Right? That's what I want to prove to you. And my premises involve making claims about the evolutionary history of human beings. That's not a good proof for you because you don't accept those premises. Right? They might be true, but they're not better known to you than the conclusion. If you're someone who doesn't believe in evolution, instead you believe in some kind of creationist account, you're pretty likely, or you're more likely to accept the claim that human beings originated in Africa than you are to accept claims about human beings' evolutionary development from primates, like some near-term ancestor with chimps, to human beings, you're not going to accept those. You're more likely to accept the claim about human beings originating in Africa. And so for you, that won't be a good proof. Right? And you might think that's all that Aristotle has in mind. Unfortunately, it's not. Or rather, in a sense, fortunately, because there's an important point about to be made. For that, going to go back to the text. All right, so Aristotle says, now, prior and better known are ambiguous terms, for there is a difference between what is prior and better known in the order of being and what is prior and better known to man. I mean that objects nearer to sense are prior and better known to man. Objects without qualification, prior and better known, are those further from sense. Now, the most universal causes are furthest from sense, and particular causes are nearest to sense. And they are thus exactly opposed to one another. All right, what's going on here? Well, we see again this contrast between the universal and the particular, which was such a big deal in chapter 1. This is all relating to, and it's obnoxious that he wrote it this way, this is all relating to something Aristotle is not going to get to until the very last chapter of this book. Everything's building up towards it. And this distinction won't make much sense on its own without that. So I'll just say this. Aristotle believes that better known to individual human beings is what we can observe. Right? That's the stuff we know best. But that there's a different sense of better known whereby the most universal truths are the things that are better known. And I'm not going to be able to explain this contrast very well. I'm just going to have to tell you this is something Aristotle says. And it all goes back into this contrast between knowledge of particulars and knowledge of universals, which is sort of the whole motivating issue of this book. And in many ways, the motivating issue behind lots of Aristotle's whole theory of everything. Now, I know I promised at the beginning here that I wasn't going to take a whole video for each chapter, but I'm about to cut off this video at the end of chapter 2. So you get a whole video on chapter 2. And the video for the next video is probably going to spend all its time on chapter 3. So maybe I am going to do a video in each chapter. Won't that be annoying?